searching history for buried classics. This is Lost Treasures of Gaming.
Welcome back to another episode of Lost Treasures of Gaming. We are back. We have not gone anywhere. We are still here, and I am still Sean Evans, otherwise known as Zion Tane.
And I'm still Sid Bolton, your gaming archaeologist, and you can find me as Dirk the Daring on PSN and Xbox Live. Sean, it has been a while.
It has been, yes.
We have a little bit of a hiatus between shows, and really the only reason is because it is sometimes tough to get a hold of these developers. They're very busy people. A lot of them are still in the industry and still doing things, as such as the case as our guest coming up on today's show. So it's difficult, more difficult than you might imagine to set up these interviews. But I am happy to say after 15 months of perseverance, we finally have someone that I actually worked with briefly back in the 80s, who is a fellow Canadian on the show today.
Yes, we have Chris Gray, a fellow Canadian, as you said, and he basically grew up not far from where you and I grew up.
That's right. Very close, actually.
And, of course, the game we're going to be talking to him about today is Boulder Dash, another old favorite of both of ours. I remember playing this game on the Commodore 64. You know, it's... do you want to describe the game, Sid, for those who have never played it?
Yeah, so it's, if you think about the way Dig Dug is, where you're kind of running around and sort of digging into an area, it's kind of like that, except it had this really cool mechanic where if you would walk underneath a rock, you were collecting diamonds, the rock would then fall, which would then destroy the enemies that are after you, and of course you had to be careful that you didn't have it fall on yourself.
Exactly.
And the game has a lot of really interesting, charming things. It was a very polished game, for the time. Like, it was just had a lot of things going for it, and so it's a classic, and it's been on many platforms, and it's even seen some recent releases, which we'll talk about.
Yeah, and the nice thing about it too, it actually had some early physics engines type stuff going on for it. You know, the way the boulders would fall, and if multiple fell on top of each other, they'd essentially roll off. You know, like they would for real. And it was interesting. It was a fun game, and it was, a kind of game where there was no set way of doing it. You did it how you wanted to do it.
Right.
To collect the diamonds and get to the end. You chose your own path, which was, I think, unique for the time as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it had a lot of unique elements to it, and and it's proof that it has endured for over 30 years, and
yes.
So it's definitely interesting, and we're going to find out some other really cool stuff about the early development and whatnot. So without any further ado, let's talk to Chris Gray, one of the creators of Boulder Dash.
Chris, thank you so much for joining Lost Treasures of Gaming. It's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Well, thanks very much, and great to be here. Looking forward to the conversation. So
excellent. So you are a fellow Canadian, which is awesome.
I am.
Where exactly are you from?
I'm originally from Montreal, and sort of spent the first 7 or 8 years of my life there, and then the family moved outside Toronto to Oakville, and that's where I spent my more formative years through my teenage years and young adulthood, and that's the same place where Boulder Dash was conceived.
Yeah, so I grew up in Hamilton, which is not far from Oakville. So
and I've actually met you in Oakville when you had your Grey Matter interactive software company many years ago. So, I remember you being in Oakville many years ago.
Yeah, it was a good place to start up a games company, and literally, my first office was down the street from where I grew up.
Awesome. So why don't you tell us a bit about how you got into game development? Like, what got you to where you were when you created Boulder Dash?
It's going back. It would have been, I guess, the late 70s, early 80s. Just started developing a fixation on video games, and literally starting with things like Pong. And even before that, I loved board games. So I guess I've always had some kind of game gene in me. The family got an Atari VCS in the early 80s and got addicted to that, and then just sort of discovered coin ops. And eventually, computers were starting to show up in the early 80s, and my parents sprung for an Atari 400 with a flat membrane keyboard. And the deal was they wouldn't buy us any games, my brother and I, and the idea was we would, use the computer to learn how to program and actually get something educational out of it. And of course, the first thing I wanted to do was start figuring out how to make games that resembled the ones that I'd seen, on consoles or in the arcades at that point. And then from that point on, I taught myself BASIC and assembly language, and somewhere along the way in high school, I started writing games, and I had friends who had Ataris, and I would, put the games at that point early on, it was on a cassette tape, and they would take the games home and play them and give me feedback, and I got a lot of encouragement, and people were, surprised how cool the games could be. And it evolved from there, and eventually I ended up with what was the first prototype for what became Boulder Dash. It wasn't called Boulder Dash at that point. And through a series of connections, ended up showing the game to a company in Toronto who at the time published games on the Atari. They were called In-Home Software, and nothing really ever came out of that conversation, but they introduced me to another programmer, Peter Liepa, who came on board, and basically between the two of us, we created Boulder Dash.
That's awesome. So you were essentially created Boulder Dash at home, and you're saying you actually gave the cassettes to friends to in essence, quality control for you.
Yeah.
And to beta test it.
Yeah, to get inspiration. And again, it was so, and I look back on it now, it was really right at the beginning of the games industry. It didn't really feel like it at the time because there had been, I was still probably like 13, 14, 15. So it felt like games had been around a long time, but actually they hadn't. So everything was new, and it was impossible to get any. It's amazing to me now to, see people going and getting, advanced degrees in game design or development. And at the time, your resources were pretty much any people you knew or, the odd video game magazine or programming magazine that might teach you how to create a game.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, that's the era Sid and I both grew up in as well. What was the inspiration behind Boulder Dash? When you just sat down and said, I'm going to create a game, how did you create that game?
Well, I've been sort of evolving my capabilities on the Atari, and then I remember there was a game I'd seen. There were a few things in the arcades around the same time, but one in particular, there was a game called The Pit that had kind of a neat mechanic. So I took that as inspiration, and then I added to the mechanics to the way the boulders moved around the screen and made them roll and fall, and sort of it went from there. And then as the game evolved, it became more sophisticated. Peter was a much more experienced programmer, and he managed to sort of rewrite the thing to make it go really fast, and then the scrolling was added, and, it eventually evolved into what people know now as Boulder Dash.
That's so cool. And exactly which language were you creating it on originally?
The original prototype was actually done in BASIC.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and the first one that came out was done in a compiled fourth language, which most people have never heard of, but it was something available at the time. So,
now, what do you think about? I think you were involved in terms of at least demonstrating it. But what do you think about Boulder Dash coming out for the Intellivision last year? So a new version of a game 30 years old, and you yourself have released a mobile version of Boulder Dash as well, as I understand.
Yeah, I mean the simple answer is it's astonishing to me that it's still out there and people still know it and love it after 30 plus years now. And I think at the time nobody ever thought about as we went forward how the technology would keep improving, and then eventually you'd be able to sort of take any game that existed in the past and really have it become current again or improve on it. And the Intellivision one, that's kind of a full circle thing where, there's a company that just created a brand new version for Intellivision and created their cartridges, and I played it at the Classic Gaming Expo in Las Vegas last year, so, kind of a crazy full circle. And then, of course, going in new directions, when I started up Tapstar a few years back, we were looking for game ideas and things that we thought might be relevant, and of course Boulder Dash came to mind, being the first game I'm known for, and hadn't really been updated in a way that I thought was appropriate on mobile. So we went ahead and created this all new version that's out on iOS, it's on Android, it's on Amazon, and we added diagonal movement and walls, and it's got about 300 levels and much more sophisticated physics than the original one.
So when you were sitting down at home, how old did you say you were approximately when you were doing Boulder Dash?
Probably 13 or 14.
So did you ever dream that you'd be where you are today and Boulder Dash would still be alive, 30 years later?
No, I mean, you have no way of looking. No, you have no way of looking ahead. So it feels strange sometimes to think that that's still again, something relevant to the audience that knows it. But at the time, yeah, you were just thinking about the hardware you were using, and this whole idea that the computers would keep evolving as fast as they have, it really hadn't happened yet. So you had, a handful of machines out there like the Atari and the Commodore 64, and maybe later on the PC and the Apple II. But that's kind of the landscape. And then, of course, now we know how it's evolved, and these mobile devices are, they're pretty extraordinary bits of hardware, and they're, thousands of times more powerful.
Yeah.
Than the computers of the day. And I think the first computer had 16, initially it had like 16K of RAM. That's it for everything.
Yep.
And now you could barely fit a tiny little compressed, image that might fit in like a few pixels of your screen, and that would be 16K. So it's pretty, if you'd sort of described the future, you wouldn't have believed it,
Now,
anyway.
Stepping outside of Boulder Dash just for a second, the first game that I actually realized that you had done, I think I had played Boulder Dash, but the first game that really sort of caught my eye that you had worked on was Infiltrator. Now, you mentioned that you had an Atari 8-bit computer. I had the Commodore 64, and that was the version that I had. Did you develop it on the Atari, or did you develop it on the 64, or did you do both?
Boulder Dash or Infiltrator?
Infiltrator.
Oh, Infiltrator, yeah, at that point, so the Commodore 64, or the C64 as we used to call it, that was becoming the dominant platform for games globally, and it was much bigger in Europe. So I think between Boulder Dash coming out and a bunch of other discarded prototypes and things, when I started working on Infiltrator, that was actually from the ground up on the C64. Okay, so that was like learning a whole new platform basically with different graphics chips and sound chips and everything. And and that I was quite happy with the way that turned out. It was different for its time. I like to say it was one of the first sort of it wasn't really an open world game, but it was sort of a precursor to games where you could get in and out of vehicles and do different things, right? It wasn't restricted to one kind of gameplay.
Yeah, no, it's for those that have never played it before, it's interesting because as far as I know, it's one of the first sort of I don't want to say multi-screen, but it's kind of like that where it's you're in the helicopter and then you land and you do things, and it has kind of a spy versus spy feel to it and everything. So I really enjoyed that game, and it was I just remember thinking too, like it had your controls on the screen were very large, so when you moved the joystick, it moved on the screen and stuff like that. It sounds really simple today, but at the time, you have to realize that was actually pretty cool stuff. So
yeah, thanks. No, I was just trying to make it feel more immersive and more exciting, and push the graphics potential of the C64 as far as I could at the time.
Now, you had your own company in Canada, and then you've worked for other game companies, including Electronic Arts. Like you've been in this industry ever since you started with Boulder Dash. Obviously, you've stayed in the industry. What would be, looking back on the past 30 plus years, what would you say was your most fun time? Was it back when life was simple with Boulder Dash and Infiltrator, or was it more when you got into larger games with bigger companies like EA?
It's a good question. I think it's always the most exciting the first time. So the first time I held a Boulder Dash box in my hands was pretty exciting, and I don't think it ever got better than that in terms of like having a game come out. And now, of course, you kind of we go to the opposite side of the spectrum where there's almost no retail business left, or at least it's shifting away. So the sort of excitement you had of launching a game, it's a lot less dramatic now when you sort of click a box on a screen and a checkbox and your game's now for sale on an app store somewhere.
Yeah.
So I kind of miss that.
Yeah, for sure.
And then you have your ups and downs. I mean, there was a challenge growing my own studio. I think we peaked at like 75 people. And had some hits in there. And then, so some of those moments are very memorable, and actually just building that business has its own rewards because you sort of shift out of being I went from being the only person working on the game to, leading a team to leading multiple teams. So those are all transitions in your life, and they're all exciting in their own way. And then when I went to EA, I got to work on a big global launch for the Harry Potter games when they were first coming out. And that was kind of amazing because, you could go anywhere pretty much in the world around the holidays of, would have been 2001, and you would have seen the game at retailers. And I remember watching kids buying it. It was the first time I'd actually ever seen someone physically buy a game of mine.
Because normally,
Really?
Yeah, you'd go into the store and you might see your game in stock, and you'd always make sure it was arranged so it was more prominent than the other games, or if somebody hit. So
you were that guy that moved the game in the store, weren't you?
I'm that guy. Yeah, I moved. If I saw it there, I'd move it. And then once in a while, you'd be in a store, you'd be in Toys R Us, and you'd see a game in the bargain bin, and it would be one of your games, and they were clearing out the inventory. You'd feel a little sad. But there was something about going to see it in a physical location that kind of made it exciting. And now it's just more virtual, more ethereal. But hey, the world's changing, and it's kind of cool that I can click on a box and have the game for sale in any one of 150 countries, at my discretion. So it's just a different world.
Now, your brother Nick worked with you on, I know he worked with you on Technocop and maybe some others, and then from what I understand, he also, because I actually connected with him last year sometime actually and talked to him a little bit about the games he worked on, and he had mentioned that he was working with you again on the 30th anniversary of Boulder Dash. What's it like working with a sibling in this industry? Did you guys always get along? You guys started obviously in the same place with that Atari 8-bit computer. What was it like working with him?
It was, it can be fun, and it's also challenging when it's your family. So there's definitely that element of, blood is the thickest, connection. So there are times when maybe you don't make the right decision about something because you're probably thinking too much about how it affects, your brother or how it affects your family. But, in the end, we made it work as best we could, and then we went our separate ways for a while, and then he was getting back into games development on his own, and we ended up working on a game which is close to being done, which is not Boulder Dash, called Run for Your Life. And then he's got so many great skills he could bring to the table. We needed some support for Boulder Dash more recently, and so he came on board and has helped enormously on that. He's a very, very bright and talented guy, and again, he's been through all sorts of different sides of businesses. He actually worked in the film industry for a few years doing effects, computer generated effects and compositing, so he understands graphics and development on a bunch of different levels.
That's cool. I want to jump back to Boulder Dash because there's something about that game that is, I believe, one of the first that it did was it went to the home console first and then went to the arcade.
Yeah, it's unusual that way. So in fact, Boulder Dash was one of the first games, I think, in the history of the industry where it ended up being published, while it was still a new game. It ended up being published on many, many, many different platforms. So
yeah.
if people forget, it used to be, you were an Atari guy or an Apple guy or a Commodore guy or girl, and you could argue which machine was better based on, where your favorite games were. And they were kind of exclusive to those platforms, like, Atari VCS versus ColecoVision or something. And Boulder Dash was one of the first games that broke that mold, and it ended up coming out on, so it started on Atari, and then there was a C64 version, and Apple II, I'm sure, and other Apple variants of the PC and the early IBM PCs. It ended up on more consoles. It ended up on the Spectrum in Europe and the BBC Micro. So it went to a wide audience, and ultimately, again, it's been on so many generations of hardware now that it's kind of like Tetris or something, where it just keeps showing up and it's not going to go away.
Really,
which is cool because it has it was really the precursor to a lot of physics-driven games, right? Because it has an open world and it doesn't really have it's not a rigid way to play the levels. You can kind of do anything you want.
Yeah.
Tetris and Dragon's Lair.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Dragon's Lair's on every platform, pretty much. I had a question about, with Boulder Dash, with, Rockford, who's the name of the main character there. When you don't move him, he starts tapping his feet like he's bored and whatnot. And I don't know why I've always been fascinated with this in games. I'm pretty sure Boulder Dash was the first time I had ever seen that in a game. Where did that come? Was it your idea? Was it Peter's idea? Where did it come from? And do you think that something as simple as that adds value to the character itself and makes the character more likable?
Well, first of all, yeah, that was Peter's idea. So hats off to him. He came up with all sorts of great stuff. Over the course of development. I think it makes the character enduring and kind of, he seemed more, lifelike. And if you go back and look at games at the time, when you stop moving, your character just would have some rigid pose. And just a simple, literally a 1 pixel eye blink and 1 pixel up and down on his foot, and suddenly he had character and he was impatient and, I think it was a really cool idea, and yeah, it's been imitated. And there was actually, funny enough, I think there was a magazine in the UK called Zap 64, which was really popular back in the 80s.
Yeah.
It video game reviews, and they turned Rockford into a character who kept appearing at the borders of the pages. So he kind of became his own iconic character.
Oh, that's cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I mean, it's too bad. I guess nothing else really happened with him. He never turned into. These days, you'd say, well, he's going transmedia, and he should turn into a kid series or
yeah,
something.
a cartoon or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
and the coin-op version again coming out sort of after the fact was very unusual. But these days it would be kind of not so much of a jump.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Boulder Dash actually lasted It's still alive today, but you've got Boulder Dash 2, Boulder Dash 3. Did you work on all of those sequels?
No, I didn't. In fact, my involvement was really with the first one, and then after that, nothing much. And then now here I am, sort of all these years later, and having sort of led up the redesign of it. It's kind of fun to get back involved. But at the time, I wanted to move on to do other things.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you had worked on all of them. You must have been itching to move on to something else after all that time. But
yeah, and again, given my age, it was like that had taken up a huge chunk of my life, right? It's like it might have only in real time it might have been a space of a couple of years, 2-3 years from sort of conception to release and so forth. But that's a long time when you're 15 or 16. So
yeah, for real.
Looking back at all the games that you've worked on, I mean, you mentioned the Harry Potter, I've mentioned Infiltrator. Do you have a favorite? I know they're all your quote-unquote children, but is there any one game that sticks out from your past that is really your favorite? And it's okay, we won't tell the other games about it if you reveal that to us. It's okay.
There are probably, there's probably the odd prototype in there that never made it to market, which would have been even probably more of a favorite than the ones that got out. And I guess that's the challenge. Is every game that comes out, you always see the flaws, or you sort of think about the context of the whole development cycle and what went right and what went wrong. But clearly, Boulder Dash has to be up at the top. And Boulder Dash and Infiltrator was completely 100% me. And I liked sort of, kind of taking it in some, the game genre in some different directions and combining, like the flight sim plus the kind of adventure-y spy game part of it. So, I don't know, I think both of those are good examples, and, lots of other things along the way really were favorites. Some are better known than others, but, it's hard to top the early ones just for sort of, kind of pure sort of, okay, that felt really special. And then the longer you do it, obviously, the less special it feels because you're used to it.
Right. And do you do any programming anymore, or did you what was the last thing you actually did programming on?
I think the last thing I put any serious time into was Adventures of Bob, which was a side-scrolling sort of shooter adventure thing we did for Electronic Arts, and that was an original concept. That one I liked too. It had some really fun concepts and animation and fun gameplay, and that would have been back in the sort of early mid-90s. So I haven't done any programming since then. I shifted more into management and design and business, and have done a lot of the time you spend now is just managing people or projects. So that's the shift.
And can you talk about what you're working on these days then?
Sure. Like I said, so we have Boulder Dash is the new version is out. There's a free to play and a premium version on iOS and Android and Amazon. The other big announcement there, in fact, this might be one of the first places we're talking to about it, is the PC version, which we're planning to put up on Steam Greenlight very soon. And That's going to have a nice new feature, which is a level editor that will allow players to create their own levels and then share them using the Steam Workshop. So that should be pretty cool. And we hope we can build a community around that. It'll be pretty full featured. What else? We just launched another game, Metro 2033 Wars, which is based on a novel by a famous Russian writer. His name is Dmitry Glukovsky, and it was actually turned into a series of shooters originally for THQ, and then Deep Silver have them now. But we actually worked with a development team in Moscow to do a turn-based RPG. So it's got it's all set in the Moscow underground, and you've got like dozens of different kinds of units, and you can build bases, and it's very tactical and strategic. Totally different from the shooters. So if there are any Metro 2033 fans out there, if you love the fiction, there's a ton of dialogue in the game, and lots of sort of background stories. So I think it's quite immersive. And then the other game we have coming probably next month is called Immortal Legends, and we've been kind of testing it quietly in a few countries. And it features the Monkey King as the central character, and you're in a tower defense. It's a very elegant, beautiful-looking tower defense sort of role-playing combination. It's based on a famous Chinese mythology, and hopefully with this being Year of the Monkey, hopefully we'll have some good luck with that, but it's got really high production values, and it's a pretty cool experience where you can actually move your towers around. They become characters, so it's different from a lot of other TD games out there.
Awesome. Where can people keep up with that news and find out more information about it?
They can check our website, so go to tapstargames.com, and all the games are there, and you can also search for them on the app stores. So you can search for Boulder Dash 30th anniversary. That's actually, I should have pointed out, this version, the newest version is the 30th anniversary version, and Peter Liepa actually did a whole set of caves for it. First time he's done levels in about 30 years. I did do a set of caves for it too, so we've added a good 40 kind of unique levels to the game as premium content.
I'm downloading it right now.
Yeah, and it's been featured by Apple and by the Google Play Store. Amazon gave it a Game of the Month on Fire TV. There's a Fire TV version out as well. And like I said, look for it on Steam Greenlight very, very soon. And the other games, Metro 2033 Wars is on the App Stores, and Immortal Legends will be there probably in a couple of weeks.
Awesome. Boulder Dash really is a game that's on every system now, isn't it? I think you just mentioned Fire TV and
and of course the Intellivision version.
And Intellivision, right? I mean, who could say that they launched a new Intellivision cartridge in the last year?
Right?
Yeah. So, but that just goes to show, I mean, how much people love it, and I'm just amazed still at the amount of the positive messages you get from players who are like, I haven't played this in 30 years, and this brings back all my childhood memories. And we were very careful with the new versions not to lose the kind of essence of Boulder Dash, so it's very recognizably Boulder Dash on mobile, but I think the PC in particular will be great because it really benefits from having like a keyboard or a joystick input. So
now I have to ask you one thing, stepping back into your past with these games. Fiendish Freddy's Big Top of Fun.
Oh, that's another favorite.
If anyone doesn't know that game, please Google the cover, because I think if you hate clowns, this will be like probably the creepiest cover you've ever seen in your life. Can you just let us know what sort of the inspiration was for that game? And wow, they don't make cover art like this anymore. If there ever was an example of box art being a lost art, this is definitely one of those cases.
Yeah, he's creepy. I can't remember where they sourced, the publisher Mindscape sourced the image. It might have been on a Steve Martin album as well, you know that? So I don't know. I'm trying to remember how it came to be, but the concept was something I did come up with. That's one I came up with all on my own, and was part of my early days at Grey Matter. And we wanted to do some kind of new twist. There were a lot of if people remember, like Olympics games or event games at the time, and. Yeah. We thought we could do something, kind of sillier and funnier and a little bit edgier, and came up with this concept of an evil clown who would interrupt your various circus acts. So no one had done like a multi kind of event circus game. So we did things like human cannonball and tightrope and trapeze and the woman on the wheel, you're throwing knives, and of course Fiendish Freddy would do anything he could, whether it was dropping a bomb or interfering with your, cutting the cord on your trapeze. I mean, you name it, he did it. And then there was a backdrop where he was trying to develop real estate and destroy the circus because he wanted to take the land over. So it kind of had a little bit of a kind of a modern real estate development spin on it.
So you're the reason everyone's afraid of clowns.
I did. You know what? There definitely there's a real phobia there that some people have. I don't know why. I liked clowns when I was a kid, but apparently it's like a good chunk of the population that freaks them out. But in this case, the fear is warranted because he was evil. Although we did have some silly clowns who came in between levels to rate you and everything, but that was a fun game. That's another we really enjoyed making. It had great animation, a little sort of ahead of its time in terms of animation and presentation, I think. But
yeah, it reminded me a lot of the quality and level of the Cinemaware games, which were much more advanced and much better quality in terms of what they were at the time, and so that it definitely, to me, it fit in that same sort of category of quality and whatever. So I still have a copy of it, so in nice, good condition. So
yeah,
so it was definitely a favorite of mine.
We were definitely inspired by the Cinemaware quality. So that was you're spot on.
That's good to know.
Awesome.
Yeah, there were so many titles that they had done in such a short time, and it's really too bad that that company sort of ended up the way it did. But I guess that happens, right, to the best of some of the companies. So, and you've been in Florida. I think you're in California. So you've also moved around quite a bit in what you're doing, but going where the opportunities are, and the game business is sort of challenging that way sometimes. So, although it's kind of nice to see, because I think you were. At one point, you mentioned in Canada, I think you were at 75 people, which would have made you the largest video game developer in Canada, as far as I know, at that time. So, of course, it's a different landscape today, and there's lots of different companies like Ubisoft and EA, of course, that have grown and are bigger in Canada now. But certainly for the time, you were the man, Chris.
Yeah, well, it's again, you look back, and at the time, it was just the being in the present moment of growing a business and trying to find great people, and like I said, I couldn't really. It was very hard to grow the business because you couldn't find anybody with game experience. Almost everybody had to be trained from the ground up. So they might have been a great programmer, but they didn't know how to make the games fun, or the artists weren't used to the kinds of tools and technology that we needed, to use. So we hired a lot of people out of Sheridan College in Oakville. And we did try to work with the universities and colleges to get programs going to either do video game, programming or art. And over time, I kind of feel like, I think I ended up helping to plant a lot of seeds out there, because I have, friends and colleagues and people who worked for Grey Matter, either full-time or part-time, or, did contracting work for us, but they're scattered all over Canada and all over the world now. So I have friends all over, Canada and North America and Europe, and it's kind of amazing. And yet when I go to like the Game Developers Conference here in San Francisco, it's always kind of amazing to look at all the faces and think, I know almost none of these people. There's this huge multi-billion-dollar global business, and it had some pretty humble beginnings. I think just a quick kind of number to throw out there. I think when Infiltrator came out, the whole North American games business was worth like $300 million or something. That was it. Yeah. So, and that would be like now, it'd be like, one title, one big launch from EA or Activision could top that.
Yeah. And, in Brantford, which is where I'm still based out of, which is not far, 45 minutes from Oakville, we've now got the Wilfrid Laurier University now has a game development program at a university level, which is new, and that just launched in the fall. So things definitely have changed. I mean, there's been lots of college offerings, but now to get it at a have more game theory in there, and actually as well as practical. But to have that now it's taken a long time though. For that kind of thing to finally evolve, and it's kind of interesting for me, it being in Brantford, and it's nice as well because I've got such a collection of video games that it's nice to have that available to people that are in that program. But things definitely have changed for sure since when you started. It's been a long time though for you for sure, because you were in on the ground floor and certainly have seen a lot, I'm sure, in your years.
Yeah, and I mean, speaking to that point, it's actually a great time to be getting a degree in game design or development or production, because the barriers to entry, at least for now, have dropped again. So there would have been a time when, you had to go to work with a big publisher because they were the ones who had access to the consoles. So if you wanted to be on PlayStation or, a Nintendo platform, you really couldn't do it from home. You had to go somewhere and get a license. Well, now anybody can publish an app or a PC game. And Steam has done a terrific job in terms of building the PC market back up on a digital basis. And so now, at least if I go to school and I have a great idea, you can kind of do what I did all those years ago and just sit down and maybe get together with a small team, and you could build something, and it could be the next great game. So right. I think it's exciting if you choose that path.
Wow, Chris, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. This is really great stuff. Do you want to, just before we let you go, do you want to let people know how they can follow you? Are you on Twitter, or can they find you there, or?
I am not on Twitter. I probably should do some Twitter things, but we have, you can, follow us, through Tapstar. I'll give you the links. So, where are we here? So like I said, at Tapstar Games, and again, I gave you the website, which is tapstargames.com, and also Tapstar Games on Facebook.
So just look for Tapstar Games.
Yep, look for Tapstar Games. Yep,
get you wherever you are.
Yep. Tapstar Games or Tapstar Interactive, either one works. So.
Awesome. Well, Chris, thank you so much for everything you've done for gaming. I mean, you've done some fantastic stuff, and you still are. So, and it's awesome to see a Canadian like yourself doing what you're doing. So, thank you very much.
Well, thank you, and I really enjoyed the conversation, and it brings back a lot of memories, and sometimes I end up forgetting what I worked on. So I guess I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but that's part of the fun. So anyway, it's been a fun ride.
Yeah, and it was great to reconnect with you, and again, thank you from my perspective for being on the show. We really, really appreciate it, and keep making great games.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Another great interview. And
yes.
You know what, Sid? We were talking earlier that we haven't done the show in a while, and it has not gone unnoticed by some of our faithful listeners. I got an email this week from Chris Federico. I hope I said that correctly. And I won't read the whole thing. He didn't say I could, but basically, I will paraphrase what he said. In essence, he's saying, please don't go away. He really enjoys our interviews. He loves how we are very casual and how we let the developer talk. And he was very, very kind in that, and he really enjoys what we're doing. So, Chris, we are not going anywhere. I think we may have said it before. The nature of this show is we really can't do the show unless we have someone to interview, and Sid will attest that it has been difficult recently to nail down people into a slot where we can sit down and talk to them.
Well, yeah, and we're talking about tracking down people who, in a lot of cases, worked on games 30 years ago, such as the case with Chris, and some of these people are still in the industry, and some of them aren't, and even some of them that I've talked to even have said, I don't do interviews anymore. We've even come across that as well, which is a shame, but it happens. So it's a little more difficult than certainly talking to people that are developing stuff today is a little bit easier because, of course, they always want to promote, whatever it is they're working on now. But a lot of times, these men and women have either moved on or, they've maybe stayed in it a little bit. But it's tough sometimes to track them down. And so I will persevere, and we'll definitely have more guests in the future. But thank you very much, Chris. And it was kind of appropriate that we came back with
Chris Gray.
Chris.
Exactly.
Chris for Chris.
This is for you, Chris. But we do appreciate the email and the feedback. It's nice to know that you're listening and that you're enjoying it. Thank you, everybody, for listening. I don't know what else to say. It was a great interview.
It was a great interview and really good for me personally to catch up with Chris again. As I said, I worked with him briefly many, many, many years ago, and I've followed his career. So it's kind of nice to be able to touch base with somebody that you know in the industry, and it's good to know that he's still making games because a lot of people aren't, and he's still successful at it, and he certainly has a lot of great experience. And thank you, Chris, for taking the time today.
And again, as Chris mentioned on the show, if you want to find out more information about the games he's doing, check out Tapstar Interactive or Tapstar Games. I think they'll both get there. So that is it for this episode of Lost Treasures of Gaming. Thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget that every Friday, GamingHistory101.com will do a video of the game that we just featured. That includes, if we're not here in Lost Treasures of Gaming, there is always a lost treasure on our mother show, the OMG Hour, so be sure to check that out as well if you're missing this one. That show gives you more up-to-date information about games. It's what we've been playing, and it's about the latest news in the gaming world that we all love. Of course, you can follow this show on Twitter as @LostTreasuresOG, and I am Zion everywhere.
And on Twitter, I'm at Sid Bolton. That's Sid with a Y. And if you want to use email and send us an email, whether it's to be like Chris and let us know that you missed the show during the hiatus, or if you have any suggestions for maybe who we should feature on the show, or you just want to drop a line and say hi, you can do so at losttreasuresofgaming@gmail.com. You can also read the show notes for this episode and many others, and check out our other shows at omgnexus.com.
And that is it. Thank you for joining us. As I mentioned before, listen to the next episode of the OMG Hour to get a preview of what our next buried classic could be.
See you soon.
This has been an OMGNexus.com production.